Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 3 of our Toys and Joys 1929 Ford stake bed truck build. When we left last week's show, we had just got the cab assembled as well as the bench seat put in. And this week's show, we're going to start off with one of my most hated items to make on a scale model, and that would be the steering wheel. Well, for the most part, when it comes to Toys and Joys steering wheels, they get you to buy one of their ready-made ones, and I don't like doing that. I like making my own. It also seems that every time I make one, I use a different method. So I'm going to try something different today. And what I've done is I've drawn this out on a piece of 1/4 inch thick walnut. It is 1 7/16 in diameter. The steering wheel that I've drawn is 1/8 of an inch thick. I have drawn a 3/8 diameter hub in the middle. And these arms that come out of that center hub, they measure in at 1/8 of an inch thick. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to drill a 1/4 inch hole right in the center, and as well, I'm going to take this over to the scroll saw and very carefully cut it out. Well, for this, I have left the hub intact. I did not cut that on the scroll saw. I just cut it roughly to its size for the outer diameter. And what I'm going to do now is I have it here on a pen mandrel, and I am going to very carefully, with light passes, turn the steering wheel to round. And with that rounded, I will now round off the outer edges of the steering wheel. And at this point, you can sand this outer edge, being careful not to take away your pencil marks. Well, at this point, our pencil marks are on this side of our steering wheel, and that will end up being the back of our steering wheel. So what I want to do here is I want to mark roughly that 3/8 hub right in the middle here. And then we're going to mark roughly our steering wheel here, just like that. We'll take a measurement and verify that it's 1/8 of an inch. Now, what I want to do at this point is I'm going to use a detailing chisel, and I'm going to end up carving some of this away to give this a bit of a recess on the inside. And once I get out to the steering wheel's edge, I'm going to round over that inside section there where I marked the 1/8 of an inch. Now, once we have that done, we can give that a light sanding, and we will take it over to the scroll saw and cut out the marks that we made on this side of our steering wheel. And this is what we ended up with. I'm quite pleased with this. I think it looks great. It needs a little bit of sanding, but that's no big deal. You just want to be careful. It is a fragile piece, but we've got this huge 1/4 inch hole in the middle, and we know from our earlier part of the build that the hole for the steering wheel is 3/16 of an inch. It's no big deal. We're not done making this piece yet. But what we're going to do at this point is I have a little piece of 1/4 inch dowel that I have rounded off on the end. I just chucked it up in a cordless drill and rounded it off. And we're just going to glue that into place here on our steering wheel. And that will give us a nice little hub there. There you go, just like that. Check that out. Okay, so we're going to let that dry, and we can move on to the next part of the steering wheel, which will be the connection or the stem. So for the stem of the steering wheel, I've taken a little half-inch block, half-inch by half-inch block of walnut. I have glued it to a 3/8 dowel, and all I'm going to do is I am going to chuck this up. I could even do it in a cordless drill, but we are going to round this off, and this will end up being the hub of our steering wheel. And that can get, once we get it the right dimension, that can get glued onto the back here to give our mounting point, and then it can just be inserted into the hole in the cab of our truck. And there you go, there is the finished steering wheel. This can get glued into this little 45-degree hole that we drilled in here. There we go. Just like that. You'll put it all the way through and then apply glue to this back end here. That way you don't have to get inside to try to clean up squeeze out. So we'll just spin it in through the hole here to get it to the position that we want it. I think right about there looks good. And that's it. You can clean up the squeeze out, and once it dries, you can flush cut that piece of dowel. Okay, and the next step that we're going to move on to will be the stick shift of this truck. Well, if we look at the plans here, it does show the stick shift. It also shows at the top a hole that we should have drilled for the stick shift, but I missed it. So sometimes you got to get just a little bit creative, and that's what we're going to do for this. And we need to head back over to the lathe. Well, what I've done is I have taken a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch by 5/8 long piece of walnut, and I've glued it onto a 4-inch section of 3/16 dowel with just a little tail hanging out the back end. And the first thing I want to do, what we're going to do is we're going to turn the stick shift, believe it or not. And the first thing we want to do is we want to turn this piece of walnut. And what this piece of walnut is going to be is the boot. So the first thing we want to do, we have a drill chuck in the headstock, and that is what we're going to use to chuck this up. A little unorthodox, but you know what? Sometimes in these models, you've got to think outside the box. Now I know that this is going to damage that 3/16 dowel at that end, and I don't care because it's going to be cut off afterwards anyway. We'll just put the tailstock gently here. This is just for support and nothing more. And we will very carefully and gently now turn this to round. Now you just want to take very light passes here because this is very fragile. Now you can see here, hopefully, that I have turned this in almost a cone shape, and that is because we want to put the boot on here. So we need to start making the details of the boot, and all it's going to be is a bunch of basically V notches all the way to the bottom to simulate the rubber boot over the stick shift. Okay, and that would be our boot turned. It's not perfect by any means, but we're just going to give it a little bit of a sanding to take off some of the rough edges. And at this point now, we can turn this around so that this little stub that's sticking out the other side of the bottom of our boot, we're going to put that into our chuck here. And now we will turn the stick shift. Now this is where it gets, I don't want to say tricky, but you have to remember this is a fragile piece, so you don't want to go too crazy on it. The stick shift in our drawing shows about 1.5 inches off the floor. So we are going to actually bring it up a little taller here, just under 2 inches. And it's just a matter of turning the shape. This is no different than any other spindle turning, except it's smaller and you just need to take lighter passes. So I'm just tapering this up to the top to get a better shape. And once I get it to the diameter and the taper that I want, we can sand that. Okay, I think that's enough. I think we're going to end up snapping that if we go any further. So we'll just get a piece of sandpaper in here, and we will level this out and sand it so that it's a lot smoother than what it is right now. Okay. And at this point, you just need to carve or turn the ball at the top of this. My suggestion would be just to rough shape it until it starts giving you a bit of trouble, and then you can shape the last bit of it with sandpaper. And there you go. And now you can just give it that last final bit of sanding just to give it the shape that you want. And there we have our stick shift. The last thing to do here is this gets mounted on an angle inside of the cab. So we're just going to take it over to the belt sander. Very carefully, we're going to sand this bottom lip off here on an angle, and then we can glue it to the floor of our cab. And there you go. Doesn't that look great? Check that out. All right, it's a small little detail, but you know what? It really makes the difference here. So don't be afraid of the small turnings. What's the worst that can happen here? You waste a bit of time or waste a little tiny chunk of wood, but by experimenting and trying new things, sometimes you end up with a gem like that. The interior of the cab is now complete and we want to work on the roof. However, once again, there is no pattern here for the roof, but you can get measurements from other areas and from the model that you've built. So we can see this roof piece here. This will give you how long the piece is, what you need to get from the rear of the cab to the overhang at the front. And by using both your model and the pattern up here for the cab itself, you should be able to cut a piece of the roof, remembering that there is a 2.5 degree angle here on both of these sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our cab, we're going to sand the inside of the roof piece, which we won't have access to afterwards, and we will glue it so that it is flush to the back of the cab and it is flush to our sides of the cab. There will be an overhang at the front. Let that completely dry before you do anything else with it. While we're waiting for the roof to dry onto our cab, we're going to move on and make this hood. Once again, we are plagued with a lack of thicknesses, a lack of dimension. We have a little bit of instruction here, but I don't like what they're doing with this. So I'm going to do my own thing. And that's what this is all about too. It's all about problem solving and being able to make the pieces efficiently and make them look good and use a method that's comfortable for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this grill section right here. And I don't want them to be through cuts. I'm going to use that same 1/16 inch router bit that we use to route out these recesses here for the door definitions. And what I'm going to do is I have a piece of cherry. Now this has been marked oversized. And I have come out 1/16 from the center and then placed 7 marks all the way along here, spaced out at 1/8 of an inch each. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the router table, and in the same setup as we had before with that 1/16 inch router bit raised to 1/16 of an inch. We are going to set our fence and run this board through at each one of these marks, but because we have done it and spaced it from the center, we can route one, rotate our piece 180 degrees, and route another one. That will give us 2 routes for every one setup. We'll do that carefully all the way across the board, and we should end up with something that looks like this. And we will take this over to the table saw and cut 2 slices off of it, each one being 1 1/8 inch wide. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, hopefully you saved a chunk of the original wood that you routed this in, because what you're going to need is 2 1/2 inch slices of that and 2 3/8 of an inch wide slices of that. And all I'm going to do is we're going to glue this onto our routed piece just like this. We're going to try to line up the grain as best we can to make it look like it's still all one piece. If it's a little off, it's no big deal, because we did make this a little bigger, so we've got a little room to play with here. And once you get it the way you like it, you'll glue this up, clamp it in place, and let it dry. Okay, while we're waiting for the grill pieces of the hood to dry up, we'll turn our attention back to our cab. And if there's any discrepancies here at the back, if there's anything a little proud or what have you, sand it flush using the sandpaper on the MDF. Once that is done, the first thing we're going to do is take it over to the belt sander. Again, we're going to verify that it's square, and we're going to round off these corners so that they match with the sides of our cab. Well, the next thing that the drawing shows is a peak here, a slope at the front. So what I'm going to do is I've placed a line 1/16 of an inch up from the bottom of our overhang here on our cab's roof, and I'm just going to very carefully on the sander here sand off that front end so that we get that peak that we're looking for. And at this point now, we're going to have to round off the back side of this edge on the roof, as well as taper it down and round it to blend it into this front peak. Again, it's all just slow, careful work over at the belt sander. Okay, and there we have the side profile. Now, the last thing to do here is same thing over at the belt sander. We're going to take this cab, lay it completely on its back, and we're going to round over our edges of our roof. And that will pretty much finish it up. Once we get that done, we'll give this whole thing a good sanding all over, and that would be our cab finished. And with that, the cab is done. That's just beautiful. Check that out. All right, so eventually this will get placed onto our model here, level with our frame extensions, something like that. But it's starting to look like something. Well, we're still waiting on those hood pieces to dry, so we're going to move on to the cowl here. And for that, we're going to need some more cherry. Now, when I refer to the cowl, I refer to the section between the hood and the cab, this little piece right here. Now, when we need to cut this, you want to cut the largest dimension. We don't want to do any shaping of this piece just yet. And the reason for that is because it mates with the hood. You need a smooth transition here if you want a quality looking model. So you don't want to cut this and then have to modify the hood to meet this piece. It's a lot easier to make this smaller piece match the hood because of all the extensive work that needs to be done with the hood. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to cut a piece, and there's no dimensions here, so I've scaled off the drawing. And again, it's your drawing, so don't be afraid to mark it up. So at the tallest part of the cowl, I've measured it at 2 5/8. The thickness is 7/8, and if we go over to this section of the drawing, we can get the width, which is 3 13/16. Now, that's all we need. We need a block of cherry in this case to match the rest at those dimensions. I would suggest measuring off your own drawing just to make sure it's the same. Drawings can have discrepancies visually, so it's best to measure off your own. I will also point out that if you look right here, there is a 1/4 inch diameter hole, and that will eventually house this 1/4 inch wood button. Whether or not I'm going to turn my own or just use a 1/4 inch wood button, I'm not 100% sure yet. But bottom line is, don't forget to drill that hole. You can do that before you do the shaping. And after a little bit of work at the table saw and the drill press, we have our block of wood that will eventually be the cowl for our truck. And unfortunately, my friends, that's all the time that we're gonna have for this week. We've made some fantastic progress. Again, a few little finicky pieces, but nothing that's unachievable. As I've said before, guys, this series is meant as a tutorial to use along with the plans to give you the confidence you need to try one of these models. This is a fairly basic pattern from Toys and Joys, and it's very, very obtainable, and hopefully this series is going to help you to achieve that if this is the sort of thing that you want to start working on. Either way, guys, we're going to get into it next week. Back to that hood and all that stuff. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click that bell, and then you won't miss notifications of future episodes of the show. It's been a lot of fun today, guys. I love making these models. They're absolutely just, they're time consuming, but it's time well spent. I hope you've enjoyed this content that I brought you today, guys. I hope you're going to try this for yourself. I really do. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.